found it kind of challenging to create some new variations of Druid beyond what we've already been seeing in Standard, but I still gave 2 decks an attempt. So here we go. Let's look at some Fractured and Alterac Valley Theorycraft Druid decks. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dawn, also known as Dragon Rider. So let's jump into these Druid decks. Now, like I said, I kind of felt like I struggled actually to create like new variations of Druid, more than what we're already seeing or what we're already kind of accustomed to with like ramp druids. I didn't go quite as aggressive. Some variations of like aggro taunt druid might still be a thing. I didn't actually go in that direction for druid though, so let's take a look at these 2 decks and what I decided to put together for these Theorycraft decks. So the first deck is what I'm calling a Beast Druid. As you can see here, I tried to include a lot of beasts, a lot of beast synergy things, some key cards to help with that beast synergy, like the Living Seed and the Guardian Animals. There is, again, a little bit of ramp mana gain in this deck as well, just to help bolster the mana so that if you don't find some of those tools or you're not able to play things to discount some of the beasts, then you can at least hopefully have some more mana to play the beasts out from hand. The way that I kind of am imagining this deck working is basically just playing things and getting on board. There's nothing too exciting or intricate with the deck. There's kind of stealth and just getting on board. And if you can manage to get to survival of the fittest, you can buff all that stuff up, and creating extra value with things like the stealth synergies of something like the Lake Thresher or Rush from Twilight Runners. I feel like in Hearthstone's history, decks like this have kind of struggled unless they really have good support. Things like the Survival of the Fittest feels like good support, but it is a little bit slow late game support. So let's talk about some of the other cards that I also considered putting in the deck. Now, one of the new cards that I really wanted to put in, but I decided it just might not be quite the greatest fit, is Humongous Owl. I mean, I just want to play that card. It seems so cool. But also at the same time, it does seem very situational. You have to be able to get the owl out, and then if you're against a deck that is playing a lot of small things, they're able to fairly easily deal with the 4 health, and then your 8 damage might just go into like a 1/1 or a divine shield or something small, and that just feels like it's really taking away from the value of owls. So I decided not to go that route. Now, Menagerie Warden is another one that I considered, again, kind of to play on more of the beast synergy and creating value, putting in another mid-game thing when the mid game especially seems so clunky in terms of how many cards are included in this list, and for it not to be a beast itself almost felt a little weaker. Maybe this could get value if you're able to copy a big stealth like the Stranglethorn Tiger or a Moonfang, but I felt like it would just end up kind of sitting in my hand too much. So that's one that I kind of considered but decided against. Now, these other 2 I'll talk about because they kind of serve the same purpose, and that is Teacher's Pet and the new card Frost Saber Matriarch. Basically, they're both taunts. The Teacher's Pet for sure could get pulled out of the deck with Guardian Animals. The Matriarch potentially could if it got discounted, but it could just be a very cheap mid-game taunt. And those are ones that I think would likely slot into this deck if this deck ended up being pretty good in the meta, and maybe I needed a little bit more taunt minions to combat more aggressive decks or really slow down some damage. For the time being, I felt like just playing some stealth stuff and rush minions would serve the purpose a little better than pulling out or just having taunt minions. And then the second deck that I put together here, I am calling Choose One Druid. And yes, it includes a decent chunk of the Choose One cards. Not all of them, but a decent chunk here. And a couple of the big synergies that I want to talk about with this deck are the Jerry Rig Carpenter, which we've already seen before, but one key thing with this card is that it is spells only. So in the list, there's only 2 choose one spells. The rest are choose one minions. So the 2 choose one spells are the Nourish, like we've been seeing, and the new Capture Cold Tooth Mine, I think is a really interesting card. You get to either draw your lowest cost card or draw your highest cost card. And if you actually can use the Jerry Rig Carpenter to go ahead and get the Cold Tooth Mine, you split it in half, you're going to end up getting a low cost and a high cost. But, if you don't pull it off of the Carpenter, you can actually still end up getting both with this Pathmaker. And I'm really interested with the Pathmaker. I feel like it kind of makes the Jerry Rig Carpenter type effect more consistent, right? They kind of feel like they're doing the same thing. And again, this Pathmaker does specify that it has to be a spell. So those are the only two choose one spells that I put in the deck. Now, a couple of other cards that I kind of like in here are this Pride Seeker to make your next choose one card cost two less. So this can apply to the minions or the spells. In the case of this deck, I already talked about the two spells, and I put in, technically there's three copies, but two different minions that are choose one. The two copies of Druid of the Claw, and then the one Cenarius. For example, if you're able to, you can get to turn 9, play Pride Seeker to make your next choose one card cost 2 less, and then be able to play a 6 mana Cenarius to go along with that to get on board. Of course, there's also options of choose one cards that you could take from nature studies as well. So you might be able to discover some more choose one cards throughout the game as well to be able to use these cards. I feel like even though it doesn't seem like there's really that many choose one cards in the deck, I think there's a lot of flexibility in ways you could use them. This is still kind of, again, a somewhat board based, just value type deck. I'm looking for value from those cards that I just mentioned to be able to get both effects rather than one, or get those effects cheaper. I'm looking for value from Speaker Ghidra to be able to use Speaker Ghidra plus an Arbor Up or plus a Guess the Weight or something else kind of mid game to help get something on board and clear up opponent minions. Talking about value, let me jump into the other cards that I also considered for the deck. One of them being Solar Eclipse, because Solar Eclipse plus Cenarian Ward is a huge, huge value, as well as Solar Eclipse Arbor Up. Solar Eclipse is definitely one that I probably should have in the deck. I'm just not sure exactly what I want to take out for it yet, is one that I'm really waiting to see how it plays out and kind of see which cards end up not really feeling very useful over more games. And that will probably be what I end up taking out and putting in Solar Eclipse for. I think Solar Eclipse would probably be the number one thing that I want to put into this deck. And one of the other choose one minions, Fair Arborist, could create some good value. It could be fairly easy to corrupt that in this deck because there is a decent chunk of the deck that costs more than Fair Arborist. Getting to draw even more cards seems pretty good. Building up the board even more for things like the Arbor Up or Cenarius is great, but the reason I decided not to go for it is it does feel like with the Cold Tooth Mine, with Guess the Weight, Jerry Rig Carpenter, Nourish, it just felt like I already had a lot of draw, and I think those have much more value and are a bit better than the Fair Arborist. Nordrassil Druid is another one that I really considered. I'm not sure if I wanted to put this one in just because I don't know if I really want to be doing this or not, but this is one that I definitely will be looking at because it doesn't seem like it's that bad of value. And getting a body along with the spells that I'm already playing and casting does seem pretty good. This one might be something that maybe I slot this in as a 4 cost over like Druid of the Claw. Maybe it goes in instead of Ghidra. But it's one that I'm just not really sure on. Because I wasn't sure, I didn't include it initially. And the last card is Guff, the hero card. This is another one where getting that potential 20 mana seems fantastic. I can do a lot with that much mana. The draw, again, there's a lot of draw that I already have in this deck, so the draw might not be as valuable for this deck, but having the 20 mana to be able to play like a Nourish and Cenarian Ward or something could be pretty good. But I just, again, wasn't sure the value that I would be getting from it, so I kind of just created this base deck first and want to see how it's going to play out. to evaluate if that's good or not. I think this deck would probably have to adjust a little bit, and a lot of these cards would probably stay. But ultimately, if I want to be playing Guff, going for really big, powerful swing turns, I might actually be taking out a lot of the choose one cards and support cards. So things like the Cold Tooth Mine, potentially, maybe like the Pathmaker, Pride Seeker, those probably get dumped out of the deck. And then things like Guff, Solar Eclipse, maybe even Survival of the Fittest probably get slotted in instead. And that does seem like a pretty decent deck, but it's not quite the choose one that I went for with this. Thank you so much for checking out these Druid decks. Let me know in those comments below what you think of these decks. Are you going to try something similar to these? You're just going to stick with what we've had before? And if you have been enjoying these and enjoying the content that I do, I would love to have you join us as part of this community. Make sure that you subscribe, thumbs up, all of that good stuff to keep getting notified and keep getting to see more content like this. And if you enjoy these, make sure to check out all of the other content you can see on the screen right here.